So the five remaining candidates to be Tory leader and next Prime Minister had a debate on Channel 4 last night. I didn't see the debate directly, but I saw some clips from it. And there's one aspect of it that's getting a lot of attention. And it was on a simple question from Christian Guru Murphy. Is Boris Johnson trustworthy? Um, and of the five candidates, it was a yes no question. Of the five candidates, only really one, Tom Tugendhat, gave a direct answer. Amy Badenoch gave a single word answer, so I guess we could say that hers was also quite direct, but it was sometimes not yes or no. The other three, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, did not give a straight answer. And of the three of them, I would say Liz Truss's was the worst. It was just evasive, it was wordy, it was a terrible answer. Um, Now, I want to talk about this a bit because I think there will be some people who will say it's sensationalist, it's a cheap shot, and it's not relevant. I really disagree because, well, first of all, I get that sometimes this sort of yes no style questioning can be a bit gotcha, you know, it can be a bit of lazy journalism, it can be a bit of well, sensationalism because some questions can't be answered with yes or no. They just can't. Like for example, if you ask someone what are your tax plans for the UK, or what's your foreign policy regarding China and Russia, something like this, that's not a yes no question. But a basic core thing about whether you trust someone or not, or whether someone can be trusted or not, that can be answered by yes or no. And only Tom Tugendhat gave the answer, and he said no. And he got an applause from the audience for doing so. Now, I've just looked at a WeOn report. I criticised WeOn recently for the race baiting by their presenter, Palki Sharma, and I stand by that. However, this report was more moderate, it was more reasonable. And anyway, according to their findings, or what they've, I should say it's not their findings, what they've reported, I don't know if this is YouGov or something else. Tom Tugendhat, now this is after the debate, 36%, Rishi Sunak 24%, Penny Mordaunt 12%, Kimi Badenoch 12%, Liz Truss 7%. I really think Truss is going to be knocked out in this next round. Um, but will Tugendhat be able to sort of bound enough to rise up enough to really be a serious contender, you know, to face off against Sunak? I think the convention is that it will be Sunak versus one of the other candidates. Um, Here's why it matters, why that question matters. Firstly, Johnson has resigned, but he is still in office until the 5th of September. So he's announced his resignation. It was recently pointed out in Spectator, I think by Matthew Paris, that people are misunderstanding this. Johnson announced his resignation, but he technically won't resign until he goes to the Queen on the 5th of September. That will actually be the formal point of resignation. Here's the thing, Boris Johnson is still Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he will be for over a month. They could argue at this point he's a lame duck Prime Minister, he's got almost no authority, but he is still Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Now, if something, God forbid, happens in the next month, say there's a big terrorist attack or some sort of major international incident, Johnson will be the leader who will have to deal with that. So he is still, in that sense, in office. He is still in a position of power. That is why the question of trust is still valid. It's not like, oh, well, he's going, why ask this? I think it's very relevant because these are people, at least in three cases, who've worked closely with him. Um, I mean, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, senior cabinet ministers, um, Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, um, are not touched by the Johnson administration. Kimi Badenoch, Equalities Minister, so she was also a cabinet member. But the thing is, the whole point about this is ethics in public life. Boris Johnson, for all his charisma, for all his larger than life persona, I mean, I think he'll be an example of a prime minister whose legacy will endure far beyond his time in office. In other words, 3 years is a relatively short time. But like Pitt the Elder was only prime minister for 2 years, yet he was one of the towering figures of 18th century politics. Boris Johnson, I think he is the most influential prime minister, at least since Tony Blair. I think that's fair to say. So this is all relevant. The issue of ethics in public life. It's why this leadership contest was triggered. It's why there was mass ministerial resignations. I think there was a recognition eventually, it took too long, but a recognition that there is something very sleazy about this government and the Johnson administration. The man's a proven liar. And why does it matter? It matters because this thing about, well, he got Brexit done. There's more in politics than just Brexit, important as that is. Um, and I do think there's something I've seen around Boris Johnson which I have not seen over any other prime minister, even Tony Blair in modern times. Maybe would have to go back to Thatcher, and even that's questionable. There's this almost cult of personality, a little bit Trumpian, where there are some people who they associate Johnson with Brexit. He's Mr. Brexit, so they get into hysterics if anyone criticizes him. Like, how dare you question our prime minister? This is pathetic because this is not a British thing, right? We don't do personality cults in this country, especially not around politicians. So, they need to get over themselves and accept that the prime minister is ultimately a servant of the people. He or she is not there forever, and if he or she, if there is sufficient lack of trust in them, they need to go. Now, in the case of Boris Johnson, the lack of trust was such that many of his colleagues felt they had no choice but to resign. Now, are they hypocrites because they were complicit in this administration and they're basically stabbing him in the back at the last minute? Maybe. I've got more respect for those backbenchers who rebelled earlier on. Um, and there are valid questions for people like Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Why, okay, you stepped down. In fact, Liz Truss hasn't formally stepped down, but Sunak, you stepped down, but why leave it so late? It looks a little bit Machiavellian. It looks a little bit like maneuvering. Um, the truth is, politics will always, always have maneuvering. It's it goes back to the days of the Roman Senate. There's nothing new about that. That's politics. But at the very least, there should be a level of integrity involved. At the very least, there should be some focus on truth, on basic truth. And the problem with the Johnson administration is it's just sleazy. It's just dishonest. And I think the wider public are tired of this. So on this question, can Boris Johnson be trusted? Mordaunt was sort of defensive. She said, "Oh, I'm not giving a yes no answer." Sunak said he felt that yeah, I forget what his precise answer was, but it was a bit wordy. Liz Truss's was appalling. It was evasive. It was dismissive. It was tone deaf. Um, Tom Tugendhat simply no, and he got an applause from the audience. Now Tugendhat is not going to win this contest, and I think there's a few reasons for that. This will have certainly helped his campaign. I think it will help him with the grassroots members who will have a say in the end, but it won't help him enough, unfortunately. It's very rare that a debate fully wins a contest. I mean, history shows that it can have an influence. In 2010, Nick Clegg had a very strong performance in the prime ministerial debate, and that strongly helped the Liberal Democrats campaign that year. But it doesn't always work that way, and not just in this country. As an example, in the Philippines presidential election earlier this year, um, the newly elected president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., didn't even bother to show up. He's now president of the Philippines. So debates are not always, they don't always change things. And I don't think Tugendhat's going to win because I think now there'll be big players in the Tory party, Truss, Sunak, and their supporters who will somehow see Tugendhat as a traitor for speaking out against Johnson, even though he has no loyalty to Johnson, he's no obligation of loyalty to Johnson. He didn't serve in the Johnson administration. And it's kind of a double edged sword because that could be a great credit to the wider public. The fact that he's not tarnished by the Johnson years and he says we need a clean break, but can actually work against him because unfortunately powerful colleagues will sort of see him as oh well, we can't trust him because he wasn't loyal to the prime minister. It's pathetic. It's pretty pathetic because if they really resigned on a point of principle, then they should accept that there now has to be a clean break from the Johnson years. This is not to totally tarnish Johnson's legacy. He'd done some good things. His strong support for Ukraine and Zelensky deserves respect. The vaccine rollout, that was a very successful thing. So I'm not saying the Johnson administration was a total disaster. I think he done some good things that deserve praise. But I think there was just too many skeletons there. I'm talking in the past tense, and if it could happen in the next month. And even now, even with Ukraine now, there's questions of Johnson's meeting with a former KGB person after, I believe it was a NATO summit in Italy. So there is just too many question marks over this administration, and I think a clean break probably is the best way to go. Um, but Tom Tugendhat is not going to be the next prime minister, unfortunately, because I say unfortunately, I like him as a candidate. I like the fact that he's tough on Russia and China. He's a former soldier, so no one can question his patriotism. Um, and I just think I guess his Achilles heel is he's not the most exciting candidate. He's not. He's an okay speaker, but he's not the most exciting person in politics. And he's not that widely known with the general public. I mean, the problem is with that debate last night. At this point, it's still only Tory MPs. And I would plead with Tory members, you have the power to choose our next Prime Minister, the rest of us don't. Please use that wisely. Please choose someone who you genuinely believe has integrity and honesty. Please don't just choose them on whether or not they were loyal to Boris. I mean, really, this country is about more than loyalty to one man. Um, Kimmy Badenoch, I like her. I like the fact that she's spoken out against woke dogma, but a lot of the candidates have. Um, but again, she's not that widely known in the general public. And neither Tugendhat. Well, Badenoch has a bit more ministerial experience, albeit a junior department. Um, it wouldn't rule them out completely, but I think people might question their experience. Although, having said that, Tugendhat is the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. It's an important body, so I wouldn't say it's totally like an obscure backbencher. I like the fact that Tugendhat has been robust and uncompromising in saying we need to be hardline with China. That's very, very important. I think Johnson, again, this is an area he flip flopped over. But anyway, I'll put a link to that clip. I didn't watch the whole debate. Am I saying that that one question amounts to everything? No. There may well be things that emerge about Tom Tugendhat that I'm not so fussed on. I mean, I'd want to know, for example, his policies on domestic issues like crime and justice, which I feel very strongly about. I actually don't think Truss has been a bad foreign secretary. I think she's been tough, which is good. But her answer to that was just appalling. Um, Also, there's this idea she's a bit of an ice queen. That's not sexist because some of the other women candidates don't have that. I just think she comes across as not very approachable. Does that matter? Well, I think it matters to colleagues. This is what I've heard. I'm not in Westminster. Perhaps it's unfair. I mean, Theresa May had that reputation, and I think it was undeserved. I actually rather like Theresa May. I actually found that she came across as quite amicable when she spoke to people. So the whole Maybot thing, I don't really know where that came from. I think it was a bit unfair. Um, but ultimately this is up to Tory members. So some would say it's not democratic. Maybe there should be some sort of constitutional change whereby if we change a prime minister midterm, or maybe there should be more of a public say on that. But we've never directly elected prime ministers. That's never been the way. Our democracy is about electing the party to power, not the prime minister. Um, make of that what you will. But I just thought that debate, uh, Tugendhat was by far the strongest, and that reflected in the poll. I don't think it's going to make any difference. If I were to predict that at this point, I would say the people who are going to drop out is Truss and probably Badenoch. Um, so it might come down to Sunak, Mordaunt, and Tugendhat. I think Tugendhat and Mordaunt will be most popular with members. So it might actually come down to Mordaunt versus Tugendhat. That'll be an interesting dynamic. They've both served their country. Mordaunt as a Navy reservist, Tugendhat as a soldier. Um, I think PM for PM. I think she's quite a smart campaigner. Yesterday the Metro's headline was "Pennies from Heaven." I think she's smart, but I think they're all smart. I don't think to me that's not. I wouldn't say any of them are lacking intelligence. I just think there's a trust issue involved, and it remains to be seen. I wonder, does Tugendhat have that killer sort of instinct? Is he, dare I say it, ruthless enough to get to the top? Because whilst we need trust, whilst we need integrity, unfortunately, being a nice guy will not win number 10. And I do wonder, is Tugendhat maybe too, I don't want to say too nice, but he just seems like a decent chap. He just seems like, does he have that killer instinct to really get in there? It's part of it. I don't know. There's lots of questions. If you're a Tory member, let me know your thoughts. Because you have the power to make this happen. Um, this backlash against Sunak, I'll just briefly talk about that. I honestly don't. I honestly think it would be a mistake to say he shouldn't be prime minister because he's wealthy. I mean, that's sort of reverse snobbery. But Rishi Sunak was, he was number two to Boris Johnson. He defended Johnson for years, basically, and then suddenly at the last minute he resigns. That's an issue. Another issue is, I mean, Sajid Javid had integrity by resigning early on as Chancellor because he would not tolerate Johnson trying to dictate who he should have in his own staff. But then again, Javid resigned twice, so maybe he's seen as a bit of a serial resigner. Um, but honestly, I don't think Sunak. I'm not quite as cynical about Rishi Sunak as some are, but I do question his dealings with his wife's tax affairs. Because if there was one thing the public cannot stand, it's double standards. And if there's any indication that Rishi Sunak has engaged basically in corruption by covering up for his wife or anything like that, then he should not be in number 10. I will say this though, anyone who is trying to smear the UK as racist, thinking of you, Palki Sharma, We On News, look at this field, look at how diverse it is. This country has come a long way. If Rishi Sunak doesn't win and he doesn't become Prime Minister, it will be nothing to do with race. It will be because people feel he was too close to Johnson, because they don't trust his financial affairs. That will be it. It's got nothing to do with the fact he's British Indian. Um, Likewise, if Tom Tugendhat wins, it won't be because he's a white man, it will be because people think he's got integrity. I don't think he's going to win. I think at this point, I think it's fair to say our next Prime Minister is going to be either Rishi Sunak or Penny Mordaunt. I think that's what it's going to come down to. I would like to see both Kemi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat in a fairly senior position in the cabinet.